The meeting will begin in 1 minute. The meeting will begin in 1 minute. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Public Services Committee. I call the meeting today, Tuesday, October 13th, to order. Review and approval of minutes dated September 8th. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we will start off with our first presentation. Councillor Erpenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're going to move those for me? Thank you. Hi, I'm Michelle Erpenbach. I'm an elected member of the Sioux Falls City Council representing the Central District. I just wanted to speak with you for a few minutes about a proposal that's really coming from a group of citizens in Sioux Falls. Several of them are here this afternoon to speak with us, and I'd invite you to spend some time listening to them and to ask us questions at the end of the presentation. I wanted to talk specifically, though, today about our role as elected officials and the responsibility that we have in terms of leading our community, setting those policies for safety and those policies for quality of life that make a difference to the people who we serve in Sioux Falls. A couple of things to remember is that it wasn't that long ago that Sioux Falls was the leader in South Dakota by voting to ban texting on a phone while you're driving. And it wasn't an easy vote, it wasn't an easy conversation, but it immediately set into motion the same sorts of bans in a variety of communities in South Dakota. And I think it's important for us to understand our role as leaders in Sioux Falls. And then, following that, last year, the South Dakota legislature also voted to ban texting while driving in South Dakota. Again, a sign of the leadership that Sioux Falls provides for the state of South Dakota. Just briefly, not a lot of tickets if you look at numbers and you think about the number of drivers in South Dakota, but I think what is important to understand is that the studies show between 75 and 80% of people who know that a law exists will follow that law simply because it is the law. And so simply by saying, you know what, we don't want you texting, it's not a good idea, and simply by saying in this proposal that any handheld electronic device is banned, that we are going to have compliance by at least 75% of the people who are driving cars in Sioux Falls. Just briefly, Rapid City is one of those communities that followed us not too long after Sioux Falls voted to enforce it, or to ban texting and driving. Rapid City's done some really great things and had some interesting ideas for how to enforce that. You've seen YouTube videos of their law officers dressed in undercover gear as construction workers and those kinds of interesting ideas in terms of how to enforce this kind of texting, enforce the texting ban. Now, the number one question you have, then I know, is what is this ban and what's the proposal? And I'm glad that we were able to bring it to committee. This is a great forum for us to begin that conversation about what does it mean to actually ban the use of electronic devices in Sioux Falls. So I'm just briefly going to run through the additions to our existing ordinance. First would be in the definitions, we would add this definition called hands-free mode of operation, the means by which a user engages in conversation without the use of either hand to activate, deactivate, or initiate a function of the electronic communication device. What that means is Bluetooth. It means that if your phone is attached to a Bluetooth device, or if your car is Bluetooth enabled, that's not banned. What's banned is putting the phone to your ear, sitting with the phone in your hands while you're driving in Sioux Falls. That's the proposal. So Bluetooth, anything that hands-free is not in the ban. And then just part of the additions that are being proposed to the ordinance is just the actual act of operating a motor vehicle, having control of that motor vehicle in traffic. So it also includes sitting at a stop sign. You would not be allowed to talk on your phone, use it in any way while you're sitting at a stop sign. So it's while you're in traffic. Then just really important as well is that the exceptions to the ban would include, really life safety. If there is a reason, we can all think of times when we're concerned for our own safety in our vehicles, if that's one of those times when you can't stop that car, but you need to contact law enforcement to protect your own life, that would be one of those times that the ban would not apply. Another exception would be emergency vehicles while in the performance of official duties. I know that we'll have conversation about, well, the police will be distracted as well, but you know what? They also are working toward our public safety and have an official job to do. The third exception would be reporting illegal activity to law enforcement agency. And I can't think of a specific example on that, but it would be one of those times when if you're, again, on the phone with the police or with the fire department and you're driving, it would be an exception. And the fourth exception is an important one as well in terms of not only those police officers, fire department people, but a doctor or healthcare provider another way that is involved with emergency response. If they're on the phone and driving, that's going to be one of those exceptions that we're proposing in this change to the ordinance. And other exceptions as well, engaging in, explain this one to me, Jim, the hands-free mode of operation that's used to engage in telephone communications or to listen to audio transmissions, that would be that's the Bluetooth exception. And the GPS is another exception as long as it's attached to your car. And the example I've been using is I use my phone for GPS all the time, but I have a little bracket that it sticks to my dashboard so that's one of those options so that you still can use it as a GPS, but you just don't want to have it in your hand. And then the last exception on that list is for non-cellular two-way radios, and that would be, you've seen them, it's all kind of old school, but in terms of cell phone use, that's the specifics of the ban is cell phone use. A couple of things to think about, and then I'm going to have the folks come up and join me. The list that's on the screen right now is an incredible list of organizations in Sioux Falls that have already expressed their support for this ban. And again, it's a ban of the use of electronic devices while you're driving a vehicle, while you're in control of the vehicle. Some of these companies have already, Raven Industries is one of them, have already banned that process when their employees are driving. If you're driving for work in a Raven Industries vehicle, you're not on the phone and you're not texting. It's the rule for your work. And it's interesting, they're not on the list, but the same rule applies to employees of the City of Sioux Falls. If you're driving for work in a city vehicle, you're not to use a cell phone, you're not to talk on the phone, you're not to text in any way. And so it's important to understand that this group of corporations in Sioux Falls already supports this, and I know that there are more than that will be speaking with you as well in terms of this being an important safety issue for the City of Sioux Falls. And finally, I was just this massive list of individuals. I have to give credit to the people that are Safer Streets for Sioux Falls. The list of individuals that are involved is long and dramatic, and obviously you can't read it because the words are kind of small to get that many names on the screen. But glance through it, and if you want a bigger version of it, it is available on SIRE on siouxfalls.org, and you can absolutely look at that at any time. But the thing that's important to understand is that this really is a safety issue. This really is about a policy for us as a community. It really is about us taking a leadership role as the elected officials in the City of Sioux Falls. It's time for us to lead the state. It's time for us to provide a safer policy. And the example I've been using with folks as they've been asking me about this over the last several months is that it's been proven in studies that the level of distraction that you experience when you're talking on the phone at the same time as you're driving is the same level of distraction as you have if you're driving legally drunk. And so it's important for us at this time to make that go away. I don't want to drive on streets where that's happening, and I don't want to be that driver that's driving in that way. It's also important to understand it's already been banned in 14 states. 14 states in the United States have already banned it, and you know what? They also enforce it. 14 states are already enforcing a handheld driving ban. And just one last thought, and then I'll turn it over to the guys, is that we're not talking about confiscating people's cell phones. We're really just talking about safe driving, and this is just one way that we can make that happen in a more realistic way for our citizens. I'm going to turn this over to a couple of citizens that have come to speak to this, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Rich Lauer, live in Sioux Falls. Thank you for this opportunity to come before your committee. Most of you are well aware of all the statistical information, the studies that have been done across the country regarding driving while you're on your cell phone. National Safety Council they would actually ban all cell phone use if they had their way. They don't. And there are no jurisdictions in the United States that do that. But Michelle mentioned 14 states. As it turns out today in the United States, the majority of licensed drivers live in jurisdictions that have banned handheld electronic devices while driving. That includes the 14 states and scores of major cities, San Antonio and Austin, Texas being the most recent. Theirs went into effect the first of the year. In Austin, Texas, if you're on your cell phone and driving, the first offense is $500. If you're in Saskatchewan and you do it, and it's the second time, they confiscate your car for a week. So there are places that are very serious about this, and we also need to address that. I am very encouraged that the City Council appropriated, I believe, $50,000 for a public education effort to point out the dangers of distracted driving. That tells me that the City Council believes this is, in fact, a real issue in our community. And if we think about education together with legislation, the two go hand in hand. No one would suggest that we should have a public education campaign regarding driving while intoxicated and not have laws that suggest that driving while intoxicated is not in the public interest. We wouldn't have an education campaign saying don't speed on Kiwanis Avenue and not have speed limits there. So the education campaign is fine, but it needs to be linked to an enforcement of the concept. If we believe as a city that this is a threat, and as Michelle has mentioned, actually is a greater threat, according to the University of Utah School of Medicine, you are more impaired when on your cell phone than when legally intoxicated. And as you think of the number of people that we see on the street every day with a phone up to their ear, if our community understood that those folks are the same or a greater threat than being intoxicated, we would not tolerate it. The city police department last June, I believe it was, had a day-long saturation campaign. I think there were 10 additional officers on duty. At the end of the time period, they issued one citation for driving under the influence. They did one a year ago, October, and at the end of the day, it was a nighttime operation. There were 4 or 5 citations listed or issued. And I'm not diminishing in any way or suggesting we should not enforce driving while intoxicated laws. But the reality is that cell phone use is far more pervasive than drinking and driving, and it's a threat to our community. I'll just give you a little history and summation here. In 2012, when this group was put together, and we asked the city to ban texting while driving. That process was moving along, not at a great rate, and there wasn't a great deal of enthusiasm for it until early that summer, the Sorensen family lost their son in an accident a block away from my office at 26th and Minnesota Avenue. We have a similar situation today on our streets. The threat of people that are on their cell phones, that are not wantonly going out and trying to be a threat, but the reality is that they are, and every study that's ever been conducted tells us that. So the question before us is, if we as a city accept the fact that this is dangerous and are going to have a campaign of education, we need to also follow that up with legislation and not wait until the next mother loses a child to an accident caused by cell phone use. The time to act is now. The danger is present, undeniable. We have an opportunity as a community to recognize it and act responsibly and appropriately to meet this danger. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else in attendance that would like to speak? Please state your name for the record.
My name is Gary Conradi. I'm a resident of Sioux Falls, lived here most of my life. And I'd like to just let you know that I'm here in support of this proposal. I'm kind of a conservative, and in many instances I think government intrudes too much into our personal lives. But when it comes to safety, I think that government has a responsibility, and the leaders of that government have a responsibility. And particularly when the safety issues are such that violation can affect my family, my friends, myself, then I support that. And that's my position here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Anybody else would like to speak?
Good afternoon. Rick Kiley, Sioux Falls City Council, citizen of Sioux Falls, and I might add that I am also employed by the South Dakota Safety Council, but I am representing myself as a private citizen here this afternoon. Driving and talking are both cognitive or thinking tasks. Obviously it's difficult to do both of them at the same time well. You know, case in point, I would challenge you to carry on a phone conversation and watch a television program at the same time and get anything out of either one of them. So it's up to individuals talking on cell phones can miss up to 50% of what, even though they're looking through the windshield, they may miss up to 50% of what's actually taking place out in front of them. There have been actual instances where individuals, despite the fact that numerous cars or even buses have stopped at traffic lights where they have proceeded through the red light and tragically killed or injured other individuals as a result of their actions. I would encourage the council to look into this further as an entire council. I, as an educator, am generally very pro-education on issues, but this is an issue where it is proven that it's going to require, I believe, more than education efforts. It's going to require both laws and education together, as well as the employment of, well, hopefully technology in the future will take care of the issue, but in the meantime, we also need to have enforcement involved too. So again, I would encourage the council to look into this, and this is an issue where it's well beyond other distractions such as putting on makeup in the car or eating a hamburger in a car. We see the use of cell phones much more frequently than we do the other distractions that people will sometimes point out to us. In fact, coming here today, I bet you from my home to council chambers, I bet you I saw at least a half a dozen individuals on the phone. I did not see a single individual eating a burger or putting on their makeup. Of course, it was the afternoon, but anyway, again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm Dick Sabers. I'm a retired Supreme Court justice. I'm still working when there's a disqualification. So I just want to mention that it is not against our ethics to speak out on a public safety issue. As a matter of fact, it is encouraged. And I would just like to go back. First of all, I think Michelle stole my whole speech, which was going to be short anyway. But you think about the city of Sioux Falls, the park departments we have, the bike trails we have, the river walks. We're the leader in the state of South Dakota in almost everything. And it would be a shame if we didn't take this first step in relation to cell phones, because it is a safety issue and we should be the leader in safety issues also. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good afternoon. My name is Dick Gregerson. I'm almost a lifelong resident of Sioux Falls. I've served in a number of different governmental positions, which I think helps me when I talk about proposed legislation. I have served in the legislature. I was on the Highway Commission for 16 years. I was assistant city attorney. And so far, I've been involved quite often and quite on a regular basis of being involved in government. And I enjoy it, and I know the difficult time you have in issues like this. But let me just relate to you one story. And this, when you're personally involved in this type of issue, you get a little personal about the issue. My daughter and my granddaughter were coming over to my house, and they had stopped, had their turn signal on, and this happened about 100 feet from my house. Another person came, and we pretty sure that they were texting because they were going at a fairly high rate of speed, no skid marks. Policeman came out, and he thought the same thing. But they demolished my daughter's car. Both my daughter and my granddaughter were taken to the hospital. They were very shook up, very nervous, and had some minor injuries, fortunately. But when you have that happen to you, when you have that happen to your family, you know, it's kind of hard to be politically correct and be a gentleman. You get mad about it, and I do. But I know that your job is difficult. I'm not saying it's not, but I really urge you to give the positive action to this because it's so important. It's so important for our kids and everybody. And when you see more and more of this, you know, I was going through the code. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but for many, many years, we've had in the books, no person shall drive any motor vehicle equipped with any television viewer, screen, or other means of visually receiving a television broadcast which is located in the motor vehicle in such a position that it is visible to the driver while operating a vehicle. Now when TV came in, we used to put TVs in the car. The legislatures at that time recognized how dangerous it is, and so they passed this. Now, I've heard some comments about, well, we don't want the government in the car or things of that nature. Well, if you really feel that way, I suppose you should repeal this statute because it's the same thing. It has the same objective as cell phones, to protect the public and against what we call reckless driving. And so I urge your support for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this topic?
Madam Chair, I'd open it for questions if the committee has any, and I know that the gentleman that I've spoken would be happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Comments, statements, questions?
Chair, I can start that.
Sure.
Can you have Mr. Gregerson come back up, please? Sorry.
I lost one hearing aid.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have my microphone on either, so we had a little double trouble there. In your statement there, you talked about the accident your daughter and granddaughter were in, and that the officer believed or thought that the person might have been texting. Did he go any further into that as far as with that person to even try to determine that?
No, because there's no law against what she was doing at the time.
At that time?
Yes.
Okay.
And
I wasn't
also,
sure
the
if-
police don't check and see, they'll ask, are you wearing a seatbelt? They'll ask that, but they don't ask, were you using the cell phone? I think that should also be something the police do so you can keep more of a handle on how dangerous the habit is.
Thank you, sir. If I can continue.
Please do.
Could we have the city attorney come up, Keith, please? Thank you, sir. When the city council looked at and then decided to bring forward a texting and driving ban, we really haven't seen a lot of results out of that from the police department as far as ticketing and that. And even in our discussion, there was a discussion on how hard that was going to be. How do you see this, if this moves forward? How do you see the police or law enforcement enforcing this?
Well, I think as we mentioned when the discussions were going on before, because I think at one point there was some discussion about doing this full handheld ban back then. From an enforcement standpoint, much easier to enforce. The problem with the current texting ban we have is that you can do a number of things on your phone, simply trying to make a phone call. My phone right now, you have to, because the city requires me to have a code, you have to first swipe it to unlock it, enter in a 4-digit code, then get to the screen where the phone numbers are if you don't already, or to dial in. So you can see a person manipulating a phone in a number of different manners and not necessarily take enforcement. We certainly don't want our officers pulling people over on the assumption that they might be texting because we don't want our officers pulling over people for bad stops. So with a handheld ban, it would certainly be easier to enforce. If you've got somebody with a phone in their hand, certainly easier to enforce from that aspect.
Okay. And in your discussions with our law enforcement, do you think this is something they support?
I'd have to have them speak for themselves. Certainly they're in...
Matt, that our future chief would be here too, so.
Absolutely. Certainly the police department's all in favor of public safety, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Stagers, any comments, questions, anything?
Well, I think it's fair to say that everybody in Sioux Falls is against people driving vehicles in a less than safe way. That's also true for me, too. I don't want people out there driving and not paying attention like they should. However, I guess I would wish that we would focus more on education. We've had some really good commercials lately on TV about distracted driving and things like that. I think they've been outstanding commercials. So that's what I would hope for, is that we convince people that this is not safe. I know if I'm out on the interstate highway driving and I might be going 70, 75, whatever, and I get a message, what I try to do is I try to exit and then stop along the side of the road and talk to people. I mean, it's just the wisest thing to do. And that's what I would prefer, that we start convincing the people of Sioux Falls, the people of South Dakota, that we've got to use wisdom here. Yeah. You know, sometimes it's important to take a phone call. And even though you're out there driving on the interstate, but it can be done, and it can be done in a safe way. So as we were having these presentations this afternoon, I was thinking, we've got to come up with some different ways here of trying to discourage people from engaging in this kind of activity in which people can be injured severely. So I'm glad we're talking about that today, and I hope we continue to talk about it, and I hope we continue to talk to the citizens of Sioux Falls that, look, we cannot tolerate this kind of behavior in which the lives of our citizens might be at risk.
Thank you, Counselor. I guess I will, if there's any other comments, questions?
My comment is to the citizens of Sioux Falls, is that since we passed the texting and driving, I have myself even caught myself even starting to do that, and I put my phone down. But I see many, many, many citizens totally ignoring this law. And the trouble is, it's a safety issue. And it's becoming larger in our city with younger people driving, believing that their phone is their right. It is not. Texting and driving or distracted driving, these type of offenses need to be addressed, and I commend each and every one of you for coming up and talking about this, meeting with council members and everything. My only issue is I'm not quite sure if this is something that the council should do themselves or if we should put this on as a ballot issue. I think that's something that should have further discussion. If it, you know, what I will say if it came up in front of the council right now, I couldn't say how I would vote on it, but if it was a ballot issue, I would vote for it. So I hope the citizens of Sioux Falls take attention to what's happening here today and understand that this is a serious issue and it isn't going to go away.
Thank you, Counselor. Just comments, a couple comments I want to make and ask you to provide additional information, whether it's you or Jim. We heard that education goes hand in hand with legislation. I know that statement was made, and I know that we do have careless driving and distracted driving on the books currently. That does go hand in hand with many issues throughout the ordinances as well as the state laws. So that is there to a point. My questions or additional information I would like is, one, the impact it will have on the police as far as if there's pulling over somebody, that if this is something that passes, if they pull somebody over and they are with them during that time, what impact is that going to have? Do we have the additional resources? And the other thing that I would be interested in is car accident statistics on how it's changed, because I know it's been really different from state to state to city, as if they have a texting ban, the statistics don't really fall in line with making it better. If they have a cell phone ban, they may make it better. I'm not quite sure. So I'd just be curious on some statistics. I'm sure, Mr. Lowry, I'm sure you have those probably readily available. If you could email those to me, I would be interested in seeing that as well. For conversation here for us as a committee, I think that for me personally, I guess I'd open it up to you as far as next steps. For me personally, I don't know that public services should be making, obviously we won't make a full decision, but sending it to the council, there's lots of options that we have, and I'd like to open that question up to us as a public service committee as well.
If I might,
Councillor
Madam
Erpenbach,
Chair,
you chime in as
it
well.
might be more appropriate for me to return to the dais, but I'll just answer from here. A couple of things in response to Councillor Anderson. One of the things that I did have a conversation with with our soon-to-be Chief Burns. We talked at length about ordinances that are provided by the City Council, and he is adamant, as Attorney Allenstein said, that our police department will enforce those public safety laws that come from City Council. He didn't want to say how he would do that, but that, you know, I mean, we looked at Rapid City and there were stings happening. You know, you could see the cop was standing there with the, you know, being the surveyor or whatever. I think we have to be creative about that, and I would challenge our police department to do that, and I think that they would be up to that challenge. The other piece then, in response to your comments, Councilor Erickson, is that idea that this provides another tool in the toolbox. Whether it takes a few minutes for that stop to be made, the officer can now actually make a legitimate stop because they can see that phone right there at the ear, and I think that is going to make the difference in the kinds of things that we see in terms of enforcement in Sioux Falls. It makes a huge difference on whether I'm, you know, I can text down here and you can't tell what I'm doing, right? But if I'm talking on the phone, I've got it in my hand and you can see that. And so I think that's really valuable. And a reminder again that 14 states are already enforcing it. I've had more people say to me, you know, I lived in such and such, and they enforce it very well. That this isn't a question. This is one of those things that's just part of our driving history in those communities. And so I would encourage us to do that. Then if I might be so bold as to ask this committee to send it on to council, I'd like to see it at least go to a first and second reading. We can have those longer conversations. As you've said, Councilor Erickson, there are lots of options for the council, but I would like my colleagues to be able to weigh in on this as council members and to vote on this as council members. I think that I hear you hesitating, Councilor Anderson, but I think that we need to vote on this as council members. This is a public safety issue in our community where we were elected. We have been elected to make these decisions for public safety, and I think it's up to us to make those votes. We have some options, and I'd like to see the whole council deal with that.
Any other discussion?
Just to add on to that, yes, I do believe that this needs to be moved forward. I guess I would like to see it be brought to an informational so we can continue the discussion. This is a large issue. This is a safety issue for our citizens. And I believe that now that the citizens are able to see what's happening here today, that we could probably get a larger input from citizens during an informational. We would have the full council here to have that discussion and make that decision to move it to a regular council meeting.
Question, Madam
And
Chair.
go ahead, Councilor Vermont.
My only concern about informational is that we don't take public input during an informational meeting. That would be my concern. It would be my preference to move it to a first reading and then move it to second reading so we really could hear from people, from public input at that point. But because it's not our tradition to take public input at an informational meeting.
It is not, but the chair does have the option to allow a discussion. And once again, I think that this is one of those issues that we should have that discussion. And we should allow a larger discussion with the public before we bring it into a vote. I don't want to lose this opportunity. And I think that this might be one of the steps that we take just to allow that, as we talk open government, to get law enforcement here, to have anyone who might have a say in this to be here, and then we can move it forward with legislation.
Madam Chair, while I defer to leadership, I would, absolutely you're going to do however, because you are the chair of the council. I would argue as a member of the council then that we're setting a dramatic different precedent for how we treat informational meetings if we then open it up as a public hearing. If you'd like to create some other option for that, I'm all about that. Or if you want to have a separate committee meeting that only talks about this and we invite the public in, I would be open to that. I would be, as a council member who's been on the council now for almost 6 years, I would be very uncomfortable with changing that precedent that we've set and that is sort of set in ordinance. So I would certainly be open to whatever leadership decides, but I think we really would be better served to do a first reading and to do a second reading where we do a traditional open public hearing and we do a traditional vote. I think that we would be better served that way.
I can understand what you're saying, and I don't know that we want to walk down the road of opening that up and changing the tradition of what we do with our informationals, because it looks much differently then. I don't know if that means having a work session with allowing an extra public input. I mean, or bringing it back to public services again as an option as well. Any other?
Well, I agree with Kenny about allowing the citizenry to have more of an input. And this would be a perfect way to do it, to have an informational and allowing the citizens to be engaged in the informational, giving us their information. I think it's a win-win situation.
Would there be any, could we move it forward like this? I think, number one, I would like to speak with the city attorney on this, just to, get, because last week in speaking with David, he did have some concerns, and I wish he was here today to express those. So maybe in our meeting on Friday with leadership, we can discuss that over the best way to bring this forward. Would that be something that would be acceptable?
That, or what maybe I would suggest is that we move this out of committee. At that time, we'll set a first reading date. At that time, we can delay it. We can kick it back to public service. I mean, we can move it around as we see fit. The other thing that I like about moving it to there, if we have the first reading, there is an extra week break in between there that we can engage citizens. We as a council can have maybe a coffee with council and invite citizens to come and talk to this and share with us why they like or dislike this. But that gives us an extra week in between there. But at that time, we can also delay, vote, move it to a vote. We can make any changes that we want at that time and still have the conversations with the police department as well as Fifely. Was that sufficient for everybody?
Do we have a specific date that we're looking at here?
Well, the first reading, what I believe would be next Monday, October 19th. And the first reading, as you know, does not have public input. So that would move it to first reading October 19th, Monday, because we switched the date. A week break, second reading tentatively would be set for Monday, August 2nd as well, because Monday, November 2nd. But those changes could be made. That's when we'd have public input, as well as making any other changes.
And it gives us that week in between. Staff is asking, if I might, Madam Chair, staff is asking that there are several other issues coming on that first week in November, and so staff is asking that we set the first reading now, and then at first reading, we would set the date for the second reading so that we can kind of schedule around kind of the craziness that is city government at sometimes.
So possibly
if that would
moving
be,
it even to that November 10th.
And now Denise is saying no.
Well, what my issue with that would be is I think that we should tentatively set first and second reading now so the public is aware and they don't think it's this date and not this date, and then we can, I mean, we can certainly change it at that point.
Do you have a specific date, Madam Clerk?
Jim, do you have a suggestion or on that?
Pardon me. I was just going to say, if you go ahead and set the date, you can always defer the second reading, but it's best to have a second date listed versus nothing listed.
Okay, I would suggest that we move this to first reading next Monday, October 9th. 19th. I'm sorry, I am looking at my cell phone right now trying to figure out these dates. Monday, October 19th.
Distractions and texting.
I know, right? And the second date, the second reading would be November 10th, Tuesday. Tentative second reading.
Yes, tentative, yes.
Tentative.
I would be all right with that if council.
Monday, October 19th. Tuesday, November 10th. That will give us a 2-week time period to engage in the council, possibly have a coffee with council, something of that magnitude, or whatever leadership would like to do as well. But then at least we have tentative dates and we can continue on. Sound sufficient? We'll take a consensus. We don't need to vote. Sound good?
No, that's fine.
All right.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you to my colleagues as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Next up is mobile vending ordinance.
Madam Chair, can
Yes.
ask Michelle one quick question?
Sure. Councilor Erpenbach. Councilor Stagers would like to ask one brief question, please.
Yes.
I just have one quick question. Why at this particular time are we bringing this up? Why not, 5 months earlier or 5 months later, or any particular reason at all?
I can give you in brief. The group of folks who have been involved, they call themselves Safer Streets for Sioux Falls, and it is that conglomeration that you saw on the screen. They have been very active with this for more than a year, and then their leader, Mr. Lauer, had a family emergency that kind of put it on hold for a while this summer, and now we've come back with a vengeance. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Roach, you're up.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Councilman. Adam Roach with the Community Development Department. I was back before you in May, and a few things that we discussed was having another stakeholder committee meeting with our mobile food vendors, and also putting the ordinance into draft form, which all of those things have been accomplished. Not much has changed since the last time I was before you in terms of the PowerPoint presentation and the purpose of doing this. If you recall from our last discussions, the ultimate goal of this ordinance is to formally allow mobile vending within the public right-of-way. Initially, when we had discussions about this, we were focused on downtown, but based on your guys' feedback, we have expanded that throughout the entire community for mobile food trucks to operate in the public right-of-way. We also wanted to clarify the difference between peddlers and mobile food vendors. Currently, mobile food vendors are treated as peddlers within our licensing system, which is not an adequate approach. They certainly do not meet the standards of a standard peddler, if you will. Also, the goal is to find common ground between restaurants and mobile food vendors, and also to ensure health and safety of the public. Again, we had a very transparent process to get to this point. We had an internal team review best practices from around the country. We had internal meetings with our staff, including attorneys, parks, police, fire, health. Restaurant operators and mobile food vendors were invited in several times to have discussions with us based on our recommendations, our policy that we were proposing, things like that, and had a very candid discussion with all of them, addressing their concerns and talking through them, and also talking through our rationale for some of these proposed ordinances. I'm not going to get into the definitions, but we do not have a mobile food vendor definition on the books. So it's very important, I think, as mobile food vending continually gains traction and becomes more popular, that we have a definition for this, and we are shaping some policy to guide these folks. Permits, it would be $75 for a mobile vending permit. If you look at permits across the country, this is relatively affordable. We've seen anything from around this range up into the thousands of dollars, just depending on what municipality you reside in and what their protocol is for mobile food vending operations. Again, based on your suggestions, we did open up mobile vending locations, and that is allowing mobile food vending on private property and in the public right-of-way where land uses, where there is no conflict amongst land uses. So essentially keeping mobile food trucks out of residential neighborhoods was a priority of many because of the excess noise of generators and things like that, and then also not to commercialize our neighborhoods. Prohibited conduct, this has changed significantly when we were first before you. Initially, we proposed a buffer of, I believe, 200 feet from adjacent restaurants or existing restaurants. We have now bumped that down to 50 feet based on Councilor Erpenbach's recommendation. Operate a mobile food truck or vending stand within 300 feet of any, any downtown Sioux Falls event without the coordinator's permission. Operate in or adjacent to a city park without the proper permissions of the park department. They have their own structure in place for mobile food trucks. And also place any object that blocks the pedestrian pathway for ADA accessibility and just the flow of pedestrians. And then conducting mobile food vending from an unhooked concession trailer, which is a big concern for traffic safety, things of that nature. And then operate without commercial license plates. One of the most contentious items throughout my mobile vending journey, if you will, over the past year and a half, is hours of operation. And we're still at operating Sunday through Thursday from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. That would not be prohibited. So Sunday through Thursday, operations would need to cease at midnight, and then Friday and Saturday, operations could go until 2 a.m. If those operations are conducted on private property, we do not regulate hours of operation on private property. And if you have any input, any insight of hours of operation, we would certainly want to garner your feedback. This is pretty much the standard around the country. Other cities that I saw that had a longer window or to cease operations at 3 or 4 were cities such as Austin, Texas, that have extravagant nightlife Monday through Friday. In terms of parking, you would have to be parked in a legal parking space. Mobile food trucks do not fit in diagonal parking spaces, so they would have to be legally parallel parked. The serving window could not face the street, and they would have to adhere to all established parking rules, including feeding the meters and things of that nature. If they were to take up 2 spaces, they would need to pay for 2 spaces. Fire safety, we worked this out with our fire marshal, and it's important to him to have an annual third-party inspection of the propane devices that are being utilized to ensure they are compliant. And that would simply be a receipt from a propane fill from a reputable propane company within the city here. And then also the fear of gas building up in parking garages and overhangs and things like that. So prohibiting mobile vending from those areas. What is new to this, to the ordinance in front of you, is ADA access. And that is just ensuring that if a mobile food truck cannot meet the ADA standards, that the operator would need to make reasonable accommodations to serve that individual, which could mean tendering money, things like that, then also delivering them their food. Health, they would have to adhere to the same health standards they currently have to follow, so nothing has changed there. And another thing that we think is important to add to this is a litter control, ensuring that they provide recycling and a trash receptacle on site for their patrons. And then liability insurance for any kind of instances that occurs in the public right of way, some unforeseen accidents, things like that. We would require them to have a $1 million insurance policy, similar to the sidewalk use cafes that are currently out front of restaurants. And any questions or comments, concerns? I'd certainly be happy to address any of those. And we also have Danny Brown with the attorney's office here.
Anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on mobile vending? Turn it over to the council for questions, comments. Anyone? Councilor Erpenbach?
This is one of those that's been a long time coming, Adam.
Yes.
You guys have been working hard on this. Can you talk about that process a little bit? How many months has it been?
Initial discussions probably took place about 2 years ago on this. And then we gathered an internal stakeholder team and looked at all the different areas that we need to cover. And when this first came to my desk, I was like, oh, easy, mobile food trucks, how hard can it be? But then when you start looking at it, it's fire, it's health, it's parking. It's not just our ideas, it's the restaurants, it's the mobile food vendors themselves that need to be involved in shaping this policy. So there's quite a few moving parts to it, and appreciate you for noticing that it wasn't a quick, here you go, that's it.
Well, I just know just the teeny tiny part that I played in it months ago. I mean, it was literally months ago. It has changed dramatically since then, just in terms of fine tuning but the parts that I appreciate are, number one, that you did involve the vendors and the brick and mortar restaurant people. It really has been an open process. It's one of those processes that Sioux Falls is getting really good at doing. We don't invent ordinances, we really craft them and base them on what's out there already. And so I commend you for this. I'm excited to see this go to full council. I think this committee should push this to full council. It's something that's happening in Sioux Falls. Let's make it as safe as possible and make it work as best that it can for those folks that are running these businesses. So I appreciate your work and everybody that was behind you. I know it's not just you, so congrats to staff and all those folks involved.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Councilor Stegers?
Yes. Can you tell us approximately how many food trucks that we have in Sioux Falls?
I don't have the actual count, and I should have gotten it earlier today from our licensing specialist, but it's approximately 20.
20. Yep. And of those 20, how many are, how many private businesses do we have involved in?
I would probably classify those 20 as private businesses.
Oh, okay. So,
meaning, I don't think there's a dual ownership of different trucks, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. And also, if I could just ask, how many of these private vendors are really enthusiastic about this?
You know, I would say I've actually heard good feedback from some of them that they are excited about it because there's currently no policy out there for mobile food trucks. There's no clear, concise guidelines. There's nothing out there. And so it's confusing when they go to the licensing specialist and they receive a peddler's license and then they call me and talk to me about this proposed ordinance that we're having, that we've been talking about, and what we think best practices are. So essentially being a good neighbor.
I have a couple of questions, if anybody else doesn't. My first question is the peddler hours. If I were to be a peddler, what are my hours of operation?
8 to 8.
8 to 8, okay, so
Correct.
that's a different set of hours. I was just curious about that. My other question is we currently have Food Truck Friday, which I think is awesome. It's a unique atmosphere. It's providing additional entertainment, if you will. How has that impacted any of this? Have you had complaints? Can you talk to me about any of that?
Sure. This ordinance would have no impact on events like that. Those are all done on private property. They have had us involved in initial conversations about different Food Truck Friday events and do we have any concerns and things like that. So we have been involved in some of those discussions. We have not received any complaints from anybody about those big food truck events, and all we really receive is positive feedback, and make this legal in our community is what we continually hear.
Has anybody been having food trucks downtown? Have we seen that happening right now?
You know, I don't make it out as much as I used to, being that I have a little one at home, but I assume there's still parking outside of Wiley's. That seems to be a popular spot for food trucks, and that would be after 10 o'clock when Wiley's Kitchen is closed. And Todd Van Sickler down there certainly welcomes them to be down there.
My last
and appreciates having them.
Yeah. And my last question is, when we were here at Public Services, I don't know, quite a few months ago, there's a gentleman here from a taco food truck vendor.
Peter Chang from Street Eatin'?
Yes, that
Sure.
would be him. And he goes to some of the industrial places and the banking industries and the credit card places and sets up shop. We talked about making a change to make sure he can still do that with permission. Was that included in here? I have not looked at it close enough to ensure that he would be protected, or food trucks that would want to do similar types of business would be protected in that fashion.
Yep, when I outlined, I don't know what slide it was, but allowing it within the public right-of-way, downtown and outside of downtown, adjacent to specific land uses, so industrial, intensive commercial, things like that. So yes.
He would be taken care of in
Correct,
that way.
absolutely.
Okay. That answers my questions. Any other questions, comments?
I would just move that we move this forward to the city council.
Second.
Second? Does that sound sufficient? We'll do that. First reading will be, do we want to do it next Monday. Is that sufficient for you, or what is your time frame? I know it's really busy.
I think on that, I think we should let the staff take a look at that, because our schedules are getting pretty well filled up, and let them determine when it will be put on the council agenda.
All right, as a consensus, we'll move it forward for first reading, and we'll have you work with staff to make it work best.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. We'll move to open discussion. Is there any open discussion, any items people would like to have brought here, or open discussion? Seeing none, I
Aaron?
Second.
will adjourn this meeting.
Okay.